Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the M3 Market Update. My name is Melody Wright, and if you're new to the show, what I do here each week is try to give you some context about what's really going on in the housing and commercial real estate markets outside of what you may be getting in the financial media, as well as behind the dry statistical and aggregate analysis on FinTwit. One thing I've learned in my career in housing and mortgage finance is that you absolutely cannot look at it just from the aggregate view or from some of the indices, the reputable indices in our industry, because they're so lagged. And so what I'm trying to do here is give you context and understanding and getting as local as I possibly can, understanding that there's over 3,000 counties in the United States. But the old adage, real estate is local, is absolutely true to some extent. But there becomes a moment in the cycle when that changes. And so what I'm trying to do here is give you a sense of the local for the cities that I track, as well as understand when this becomes actually more of a national story and less of a local story. So welcome back. There's a lot going on, as I say each week. Last week we heard that new home sales were up again. This was right on the heels of that builder sentiment survey being down, and also the previous month new home sales being down surprisingly. So I would just say hold on because the month before was also revised down. So just wait. I'm pretty sure we'll have another revision. And honest to God, even if we don't, one, we know we're in a data dungeon. We know these surveys are not giving us the same consistency of results that we got prior to COVID. And then two, guys, just hang on. This is what happens in the middle. This is what happens during the turning of the cycle, is that you get sort of this up and down that can be very misleading, very confusing. And as I've talked about here and in my Substack, I've been here before, and I can tell you very much in 2007, 8, everyone around me was trying to see the best of the housing market. I used to create sort of the earnings decks, press release for my company. And so messaging was what I was responsible for after talking with all the executives. And I can tell you that every glimmer of hope, every single one, you would hold on to and latch on to. And that is also what's happening right now, as well as I think there's a lot of vested interest in the housing market. It is so big. It's anywhere from 12 to 16% of our GDP. There are a lot of big players in this market backing some of the names that you know that you may think actually are independent. So not saying anyone is on purpose trying to mislead us. I'm saying that when we have vested interest, when our paycheck depends on a certain narrative, then that narrative is skewed. And what I'm trying to do here, in as unbiased way as possible, is bring you some context to really understand what's going on. So welcome back again. As I said, just a little bit of confusing information with the builders. Just hang tight. I'm pretty sure that's not going to last very long. I think by October, it'll be fairly clear where we are headed in terms of increasing inventory and probably back on track for price declines. We've had a very interesting year. The housing market frozen except for those new home sales. But I think that what I've come to understand in sort of our, social media age is that consumer sentiment drives a lot. And that is driven largely by what people think the stock market is doing. I think that changes depending on where you are in the cycle. But I think right now, that's kind of what's going on, as well as we had that relief on gas prices. That is going away, and I think that's why we saw consumer sentiment kind of drop as well. I think every time people stop at the gas station and see that, they start to wonder what is happening, what's going on. So, okay, want to talk to you today about what I saw this weekend. If you check out my Substack, I go through sort of the trip that I did. I'm broadcasting here a little north of Miami. We're all getting ready here in Florida for Idalia. It's, and hopefully it does not strengthen. And because, obviously with Ian last year, there was a lot of damage, hoping that that does not strike in those areas again. So wish us all luck in Florida. Okay, so what I did this weekend, so I'm staying a little north of Miami, and so to date, I had not driven to downtown. I also wanted to look at this one luxury listing that has been, it's basically the first card you see on Realtor.com when you search Miami, and it's been there for 7 months. So I wanted to go see this thing. It is a designer building, definitely sort of catering to the privileged few. It's on sale, like at one unit in this building right now, a very large one, but it's on sale for $60 million or 59 million. If you look at the history, this particular unit, it started out in 21 at 50 million, but has since been kind of booted up to 59 million, but been sitting empty. And when I drove by, it looked like they were still in construction. It looked like you couldn't even get into like the front door of the building, but it was downtown, crazy traffic. When I saw that, I decided not to stop. But let me talk a little bit about what I saw on the way to that building. So one thing that I do every time I go to my cities is I avoid highways, because one thing I've noticed I've just come to a conclusion based on a story I tell in the Substack about when a colleague and I kind of took the same trip at the same time. We weren't able to connect, and I got the download from him of his trip versus mine. It was just two very different stories. He went, he was an executive at a lender. He got wined and dined, picked up at the airport, taken to dinners, taken to the club, etc. Whereas when I went to do my trip, I kind of started in the downtown area, drove all the perimeters, went out to the exurbs, which were subdivisions in the middle of cow pastures, and I stayed in Georgetown, the Round Rock area. So very different experience. And, I got to see all of this inventory all over Austin, including downtown. And when I asked him about his trip, it was very clear to me that he got taken to certain spots and not others. And his conclusion was that Austin was on the upswing. So to me, it's very important to experience the whole city as much as possible to, again, get a rounded view. What I understand about data, especially kind of with the legacy reporting systems that we have, is that you need to triangulate to the data. You can't look at just one data piece like home prices and understand what's going on in the housing market. If you do, you're always going to be taken by surprise. And also because our reputable source is delayed by a couple months. Now you might say, oh, Redfin or Zillow or all these other sources, they have very limited information. They are not hooked up to all of the listing services. So just so everyone's clear, in the United States, we have over 600 MLSs, and these are local listing sites. One thing I've learned in all of my research into those is that those themselves only have 60 to 80% of the listings because of things like pocket listings, specific broker websites, things like that. So on top of that, you have someone like Redfin, Zillow, etc., that maybe aren't connected to all of the MLS, gives you a very skewed view. A good example would be in the cities I track, Redfin was showing significant decreases in sales month over month, but they primarily have existing on their platforms. They don't have a ton of new. And so that is why that looked even further down than what we saw with the decrease in existing sales and the tiny uptick in new sales. So there's a lot going into this data that you're looking at, and it's really important to understand the source, where it's coming from, etc. So back to my trip. As I was going from here to that building, very different neighborhood and feel. So I am in a very, luckily, very privileged where I'm staying right now in an upper scale area and I drove to downtown from here. But what was in the middle was a very different picture of what I saw, in the Brickell area and where I am. Very, I'd say blue collar, lower middle class to even, probably more at the poverty line housing, a lot of scribbled for sale and for rent signs, very different. And I talk about in my Substack about how in the South, we are notorious for this. I used to say back when people were still doing a lot of crack, that that you were always one house away from a crack house in the South, because we just structurally we never really recovered from Reconstruction. When we stopped becoming sort of the raw material producers for the country, we tried doing things like bringing factories in, giving big government subsidies to foreign manufacturers. Nothing has really stuck in the South, and so it's a very interesting dynamic to see all this luxury right next to this poverty. And you say, well, you see it in New York City. It's different. And so I would say, think back to how shocked you may have been when you saw those images from Katrina. This is the type of poverty I grew up with. I personally was not shocked, but most people that I knew were. And so in the South here, we are structurally poor. And so it makes any sort of revival kind of questionable from the start, because if you don't address those structural issues, for instance, I talk about in the Substack, just as an example, a lot of people moved to Huntsville, Alabama. Love Huntsville, Alabama. Nothing wrong with it. However, they thought they could work from home. They got laid off. Now they need a new job. Well, the median salary in Huntsville is $61,000. Most of these folks bought houses $400,000, $500,000, $600,000. They will not be able to afford that, and so they will have to go back. Now, I'm not saying that's millions of people, but you're going to start seeing kind of that reverse migration from the South, but everything takes time. So, very different story from where I am traveling to this luxury building in Miami. And then from there, I went out to some, kind of, I wouldn't say excerpts, they sort of exist in their own right, but out to Parkland, Florida, where I saw some just really interesting things. Very upscale developments, over $1 million, gated communities. Many of them looked newly finished. So they're all gated. So I wasn't able to get in those, but fairly certain most of those are not full. You can tell by looking outside. And then on the new construction sites where I could get in and see, there was a lot in progress. And again, these are over $1 million, 0 lot line, 2-bedroom. And here in Florida, you're going to pay 4 times the national average for insurance, home insurance. It's the second highest car insurance in the nation. Some people think it's the first. And then you have assessed property tax, meaning it's based off your assessed value. And then depending on the area, it could be even worse. And so, kind of what I talk about in the Substack is that I feel like everyone is obsessed with possessions. I call it possession obsession. And, everything has just gotten completely disconnected from fundamentals. So so much so that, I think we have completely left all sense of reality of how many rich people are in this country, how many of them are moving to Florida. And if they did want to move to Florida, would they want to live right next door? If they have that much money, would they want to live that closely to someone else? Maybe so. I'm always a little surprised about that. But I just think if you just saw how many of these communities there are, and then how many are in progress, you would start to understand the scale of our problem. And I think that most people that you talk to think that we have way more richer people in the US than we actually do. 57% of Americans can't afford $1,000 emergency. Okay, 57%. So top 20% are, they're doing just fine. But how will they ever inhabit all these homes? And then as we've eroded the middle class, who have been carrying second homes, perhaps, their children are not going to be able to afford those if home prices stay where they are because of the insurance situation and the property tax situation. And the insurance situation is getting very dire down here in Florida, where over 1.3 million now, I think it's more than that, have to use government-backed insurance, citizens, because they simply cannot get coverage any other way. And many people are afraid that with this Hurricane Idalia, although it's category I think 3 as of right now, maybe that might wipe out the reserves of citizens, which I think is about 16 billion right now. Ian cost way more than that. So there's a bunch of different numbers out there, but just put it this way, 16 billion was just a scratch on the surface when it came to Ian. So a lot of people here in the state worried that citizens' reserves might be wiped out. So a lot to understand, but the same themes that I've seen all over the country. We have built too many homes, primarily because people have misunderstood what the inventory crisis is. It's that everybody went out and bought themselves a long-term rental or bought themselves a property to do short-term rental or multiple, okay? Thinking that the accelerating rents and these insane average daily rents on short-term rental would just persist in the future, not thinking through that when Europe opened back up, etc., that we would go back to our typical travel patterns. So this has created the illusion of housing scarcity when in reality we have overbuilt. And as I talked about last week, I think that has to do with, number one, there's no good city planning anymore. Number two, there were delays in recording the permits, as well as I've found out that until essentially those homes aren't completed until the certificate of occupancy is recorded. Well, at the counties, you have delays in recording the permits. You also have delays in recording the certificates of occupancies. In some counties in the United States, up to a year delay. And so I think that the media has been so strong in pushing this housing inventory shortage that you've had local private builders kind of pile on and, delays in the recording of those permits and the certificate of occupancies, as well as I'm fairly certain with the fraud that we've seen that there has been building without permits. There's lawsuits already, and I think we're going to see that a lot more. So what I really learned kind of from this tour, and I talk about it in the Substack also, and I have a video, not great, but a video of a subdivision in Davie, Florida, which I'm going to do some more research on because there are a bunch of homes in progress. None of them are completed, and this site did not look very active. Now, it was on the weekend, but you still see a whole bunch more trucks usually when it's being actively worked. So I'm not sure if this whole site's being worked or just some of them. But, it was very aspirational, $1.7 million. In my Substack, I show one they call the Breeders Plan. That's not me being funny. They actually called it the Breeders Plan. But I don't know who's going to be breeding when they have to pay $1.7 million for that home. They're going to be working too hard to afford it. And by the way, it's a mile down the road from a trailer park. And so a lot of this stuff, just was not well thought out. But the key takeaway, and what I talk about in the Substack, is that we are living in a time when it feels like people are more obsessed with owning things just for the sake of owning things. And I tell a little story in the Substack. I'll leave that if you want to read it. But it's just being here near Miami in some of the more upscale areas. It's just very different from what I experienced on the road in Wytheville, Virginia, in the Substack I wrote, Hope and Anecdata. And so, very interesting dichotomy. And, but there's just something seething under the surface. You can feel it here, you can sense it, and it feels like there are just a bunch of angry people, angry drivers in McLarens driving around. Like it's just an interesting place. And nothing against Miami. I'm sure there's great places. I'm sure I'm going to get to see them. But I think, with Ken Griffin coming down here from Citadel and just kind of the narratives we've heard that this is like the new it place, just kind of like we heard back in the day that Charlotte was a new banking mecca. you know, what we do know is there's been negative demographic shifts in Miami already, and due to affordability, that's likely going to continue. And then that those that are smart on fixed income coming down here are going to realize very soon that this is just not worth the money. And so everything that brought people down here is sort of being reversed. So, been talking a lot about Florida because that's where I am. And I will be here probably for the next, or for the foreseeable future. I'll keep you posted, but hoping to do a lot more traveling around Florida. Okay, so without further ado, interesting movements and the listings this week, but we'll go through them quickly. So top cities with the highest increase of listings week over week. This is interesting. Phoenix at 14.42%. They had kind of a drop in inventory that looked weird. I think it was a data issue, but they have been coming back to their more recent trend. You'll see them on the versus average list again, but I think this is interesting that Phoenix is kind of waking back up again. They've been in some sort of denial lull for some time. Number 2, Scottsdale, also interesting, up at 11.88%. And number 3, Nashville, up at 9.08%. Now, those of you that are familiar with my videos know that I think Nashville is the market to watch for what's going to happen nationally. It was early in its boom, and so I believe it will be early out as well. And based on what I saw there's just so much inventory, especially with a multifamily coming. All that short-term rental there is just overwhelming and not sustainable. Number 4, Bakersfield up at 6.39%. San Francisco up at 4.24%. Okay, top cities with largest percent increase in inventory compared to a 9-week average. So Rosemary Beach is up at 26.24%. So this is interesting. And again, these are listings for sale, just so everybody knows. I find it interesting that Rosemary Beach, if you go down to the reference section in the Substack this week, you'll see that Rosemary Beach is in the top 5 for highest average daily rate for 2022 and 2023. So if people are selling in Rosemary Beach, that should have us paying attention and watching that trend. Okay, number 2 is San Ramon at 14.59%. Number 3 to the average again here, Phoenix at 14.46%. Bakersfield at number 4 at 10.3% increase, and Nashville at 10.22% increase. Okay, so we have a top 10. I won't go all the way through the top 10, but I will. I'll quickly read off the names. But I will tell you that this week we kicked out Carlsbad with Rosemary Beach. Top spots in order: San Ramon, Coeur d'Alene, San Francisco, Denver, Austin, San Jose, Galveston, Portland, Rosemary Beach, and Bozeman. And all of these are up over 40% from the beginning of the year. So that's huge inventory and non-seasonal. Now, a lot of you have asked, well, why are you looking at it this way? Why aren't you kind of looking year over year? Because what I'm trying to see is out of season trends. The reason that I started tracking it was because we started to see increases in inventory when it wasn't a seasonal trend. So absolutely tracking the year over year, but want to see the early movement so we can understand what's happening in the housing market. Okay, So top cities with highest percent increase of single family rental listings week over week. I think we're starting to see those seasonal moves to long-term rental from short-term rental, but we'll keep our eye on it. But number one, Rosemary Beach at 25%, it's moving up. Brattleboro at 21%, Encinitas at 20.75%, Sedona at 14.29% increases in single family rental listings, and Nashville increases in single family listings. So Nashville is not only increasing in listings for sale, but also in listings for long-term rental. This is important. Okay, so now to average. A lot of the same players, a couple of different ones. Rosemary Beach to average up 55.17%. Encinitas up 38.83%. Coeur d'Alene up at 22.18%, up from number 4. Number 4 this week, down from number 3, is Portsmouth at 20%. And at 5, Galveston at 19.23%. And I give an honorable mention of San Diego, and this is increase of single family rental listings to average at 19.23%. Okay, quickly for short-term rental. So this is both Airbnb and Vrbo. And so something I mentioned last week, but I'll mention it again, is that even though we see increases in listings in many cities, the pace has decelerated significantly. And I think about this as kind of, the last ones through the door. They're trying to get on the bandwagon that ship sailed probably mid 2020, honest to God. Now, anybody who I'm a firm believer that if you want to succeed, you can make it work. And I do believe there's a short-term rental market, but you have to work at it. And I think a lot of people bought thinking they didn't have to work at it at all. And so anybody who has one of these that's successful will tell you this isn't passive income. Even if you have a property management company, it is still work. Because there's good ones, there's bad ones, but you have to be paying attention, or you're going to find yourself with no cash flow and a lot of expenses. Okay, so top cities with the highest percent decrease in average daily rate compared to Memorial Day. So what I'm doing here is I'm picking the Labor Day weekend and comparing it to Memorial Day. And so the decreases, some of these don't make any sense. Like Indianapolis is down at 59.6%. Rosemary down 48% for Memorial Day. Ventura down 41.66%. Hoboken, everybody laughs when this one shows up, but for whatever reason, it's always moving around in short-term rental prices, down 25.29%. And then Bentonville down 25.29% as well. And then top cities with the highest percent decrease in average daily rate compared to the 12-week average. So Indianapolis down 28.35% to average, Ventura down 25%, Rosemary down 48.32%, Washington, D.C. down 20.77%, and Pittsburgh down 9.89%. So I wanted to add in this week just a quick kind of comparison, top cities with highest increase in compared to the 12-week average. So El Cajon at 49.62%, Oceanside 37.15%, Carlsbad 35.37%, Seattle 33.55%, and San Diego at 33.15%. So it looks like a lot of our increases are on the West Coast. Okay, that's it for updates today. I'll put some of this in the show notes as well as some links. But thank you for joining. As always, you can find me on Twitter at M3_Melody, MELODY, on LinkedIn at Melody Wright, on Substack at M3 Melody Substack, as well as here on YouTube. And guys, I really appreciate when you are in a market, any of your local commentary. I don't take it personally. I usually just want to find out more. And then I can also give you some addresses if you're curious, want to go check out some of these areas. But, more importantly, I'm here if you have to make a decision right now, if you have to decide to sell, if you have to decide to buy, there are some tips and tricks that will help you navigate this very difficult market. So please feel free to reach out to me on any of those platforms. I will do my best to respond. And if for some reason I don't try again, I'm fairly new to social media. I get better every day, but keeping up with all of it can be a challenge. So don't stop trying to get in touch with me. Okay, guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope that everyone has a great week, and I truly hope that we all sort of survive Hurricane Idalia. So thanks again, and talk to you soon. Bye.